everyone, and welcome back to Full Recovery. I want to thank you again for taking the time to watch these videos. If you have subscribed, I appreciate that so much. Thank you for every like and share and comment. This has been a wonderful thing for all of us to get together in this way, and I've really enjoyed it. Today I want to talk about something that it's actually going to take over the next 2 episodes to get all of this in. But I want to talk about something that jumped out at me a few years ago when my husband was preaching on a Sunday morning, and it was something that began to be very thought-provoking for me as I studied it out, and it is about the subject of marriage, and in particular, the best friendship of marriage. And I know there's some people who disagree with that husbands and wives shouldn't be friends, that they should just be romantic partners. But we have said it many times that I am his best friend and he is mine. And I think that after we look through what we examine in this lesson in the Bible about marriage, I think you may agree that it is definitely an important element to a great marriage. My husband and I have had obviously struggles through the years, and our marriage is not perfect because we are not perfect people, but we do have a very happy marriage. We have a happy home, and we have always used music as a way to get through things, and we have songs that we consider our songs. And I asked him if he'd be willing to sing one of our songs here today at the beginning of this video. So I hope it's a blessing to you. If you don't like love songs, then just fast forward this video. But if you do enjoy a good love song, I think this one represents us well. It's a song that we have sung many times together, even just in the car or at home. It's a song that gives us a lot of strength, and I hope it'll bless you too.
Storms never last, do they, baby? Bad times all pass with the wind. Your hand in mine stills the thunder. You make the sun wanna shine.
I followed you down so many roads, baby. I picked wildflowers and sung you soft love songs.
And every road we took, God knows our search was for the truth. And the storm that's brewing now won't be the last. Storms never last, do they, baby? Bad times all pass with the wind. Your hand in mine stills the thunder. You make the sun wanna shine. Storms never last, do they, Amy? Bad times all pass with the wind. Your hand in mine stills the thunder. You make the sun wanna shine. Your hand in mine stills the thunder. You make the sun wanna shine.
I don't think so.
I want to thank my husband for being willing to do that. It's not easy to do something like that, but I hope you enjoyed it. he is truly my best friend, and that's what I want to talk about today. A few years ago, he was preaching on a Sunday morning about the relationship between Jonathan and David. And as he began to talk, some of the things he was saying, I just thought, wow, I knew they were close and had such a great bond. But then he read a verse in the Bible that just floored me. And that verse is in 2 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 26. And it says, I am distressed for thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant hast thou been unto me. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. Well, when he got to that part, I just thought, passing the love of women. Clearly, David and Jonathan had a very close relationship, but they were masculine men. They were warriors. They were very strong, and their relationship was not in any way inappropriate or in a manner, anything other than two guy friends. So how on earth did David make that statement about Jonathan that his love passed the love of women? And I began to search through my Bible in that moment. And while my husband was preaching, I was quickly flipping to refresh my memory about just how many wives David had up to that point. And of course, he had Michal. At this point, she had been given to someone else to be his wife. But then he also had Abigail, and he had Ahinoam, the Jezreelite. And so after Jonathan had passed away, David is saying his love passed the love of my wives. And I thought, wow, I don't think I could handle that, hearing that. If my husband were to ever say in any kind of setting, public or private, Amy, you're great and all, but that Jesse, wow. Or, Clint or Danny or John or any one of, my husband's very close friends. So, you're great, Amy, but their love is by far better than yours. I think I would really take offense to that and just have to do some soul searching and probably some questioning of things. But we know that David said this about Jonathan after he had died. His love passed the love of women. What was it about that love that made him say, I don't care that I've had 3 wives? Jonathan was so special and so genuine and so real that his love surpassed that. So I decided to do a little investigation to see what would make him say that kind of thing. And what I found was eye-opening for me. And I hope that this will be something that will help each of us in our marriage. When I was young, I heard a lot of teaching on marriage that gave me pause. Honestly, I heard some things that gave me serious red flags. And some of that teaching I learned to, even as a young woman, even before I met my husband, I learned to say, that's not something I will utilize. Other things, I examined for what they were and maybe added them to my life, maybe not. I remember being in many conferences and marriage seminars after we'd been married even a few years, and I would leave those sessions and walk out to find Joe and say, I think we're weird or something, because I hear people talk about their marriages and ours just seems not like that. And yet we were very happy and devoted. And so we would sort of pick things apart and say, okay, well, that's not for us. Or maybe it's something that we could add to our lives. But much of what I heard, I dismissed or just said, that's just not going to work for me. Many of the books I read, I finally had to put down and say, you know what, let me just see what God can teach me about marriage. As is well documented, I didn't have a great marriage to watch growing up. And so I really asked God to be my teacher about marriage. And I believe that even though I learned this several years into our marriage, I believe this has been one of the greatest lessons that I've learned, the best friendship of marriage. And so if we're going to take a look at what made David say that about Jonathan, we have to examine Jonathan and what it was about him that made David say that. And so we find that in the previous book, 1 Samuel, and this is chapter 18, verses 3 and 4. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him. He, Jonathan, loved him, David, as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword and to his bow and to his girdle. And when we pick each of these items apart, I think they're pretty eye-opening as to what they represent for us. I want to start by saying that if you are in a marriage that is struggling, please get the help that you need to make it a secure, strong, happy marriage. If you are a woman, and of course I know I'm speaking to women through this channel, I can't teach men about how to have a happy marriage. I mean, I probably could, but I don't speak to men on that. But I would like to address a couple of things. You know, people tell me all the time that sometimes what they really appreciate about the way I teach is that I'm not afraid to talk about difficult things. And so I do want to address something here right off the bat. I have never understood those of us who live in Christian homes and try to live by the principles of the Bible. We have raised our children, and chances are we were raised in an environment where we say to them, don't touch before you're married, or at the very least, you know, we have the standard of no premarital sex. And it's that those are great boundaries to have in place. And, you know, I remember when I was first coming to New York to meet my husband's family, I had met his father, but I had never met and his sister, but I had never met the rest of his family. And I remember that my mom had said to me, you know, if you go up there and you want to kiss Joe, well, you go ahead, you have my blessing. I don't see anything wrong with that. And I said, Mom, you know, I've made the choice for myself. I don't want to touch like that until I get married. And that was just a decision that I had made for myself. And of course, Joe had made for himself. We separately before we even knew each other. But of course, I had already decided how that was going to be. So, but once I left visiting his family, I went straight back to college and went to my dorm and called my mom from the payphone because I was going to tell her how everything went. And the first thing out of her mouth was, well, did you? And of course, me knowing what she wanted to know, I said, did I what? And she said, did you kiss him? And I said, no, Mom, I told you I wasn't going to do that. And she said, well, good, because I changed my mind. Don't do any of that. And I said, well, I'm not, you know, I don't want to engage in that until he is my husband. And those are wonderful rules. I don't regret having those high standards for myself. And I don't regret trying to help our children have those standards for themselves either, and trying to show them in a biblical scriptural way why they're good. But if you've grown up in a home like that, or if you have daughters in your home like that, I hope you will take into account something that I've never understood, and that is that we expect our girls to get married after having said, no, don't do that, don't get too close, don't touch, don't that, and then all of a sudden, one day of marriage, and they're supposed to be ready to do whatever. And any young girl that I have talked with, especially my own, it is part of my teaching to engage girls, to say to them, you don't have to do everything in one night or 1 week. What I'm saying here today, I'm saying with the permission of my husband, He was incredibly loving and kind and gentle, and we had a wonderful honeymoon together with no pressure from each other. And if you're a young girl, if you're an engaged girl listening to this, or you have a daughter that's getting to that age, please have the courage to tell her. You don't have to have nothing and then everything in the span of 24 hours. That's terrifying. I have a friend who sat on the bathroom floor of their hotel room for 2 days, would not come out, would not eat because she was terrified. And no one had ever talked to her. No one had ever talked to her husband and said, you don't have to do all of this. And I know sometimes with young men, they have this bravado that, they talk all big, but really and truly, somebody needs to sit them down and say, this is not easy. And my husband and I have made a pact together that when we do premarital counseling, we address this and we let girls off the hook, and young men too. And I have counseled many young girls where if I don't know who is counseling her and her fiance or who's counseling him, I'll say to her, talk to the counselor and tell him this, that you want this addressed, because it's a lot. And I think sometimes marriages start off under great pressure. I've had young women several refer to their honeymoon to me as the honeymoon from hell. And that shouldn't be anyone's experience. We need to talk about these things and make sure that they know it's not all or nothing on the first night. You can enjoy yourself. You can get to know each other. It can be a wonderful trip without that added pressure. And my goodness, some of the things that is thrown at a young engaged girl, and maybe you haven't had anybody talk to you about this, so you don't realize it's a thing. Believe me, it is. Maybe you're watching this video going, man, I wish I'd heard this. I wish somebody had told me this. I wish so too. But let's change this. We can talk about these things and help the girls coming behind us, the young women coming behind us, be better prepared and have their emotions and brains wrapped around this a little bit better than previously, than we were. I remember being in a meeting with about 25 engaged girls with a doctor and a nurse in there, and girls were asking questions that I had never even heard the terminology before. And I could feel myself, I could feel it starting in my toes. And actually, one of my best friends to this day was also in that meeting. And I remember looking over at her and she was crying too. And I was like, whew, good, I'm not alone. But I remember feeling it just in my feet and I couldn't stop it. Just the emotions start to pour out my eyes and down my face. I thought, how do these girls know all this stuff? I don't know any of this stuff. And I remember that I left that room, and for those of you who know the wonderful lady, Chris Grafton, if you know that name, she caught me in the hallway and asked me if I was okay. I said, no, I want to go call my mom. So I did. I went to a payphone and called my mom, and I will never forget. I mean, I was just terrified and also clueless. And I just said to her, is this what happens? And she said, yeah. And, oh, Mom, we need to talk. And she's like, I know. And from that meeting, honestly, I developed a little plan. I called my 7-year plan. And I thought, for the first 3 or 4 years, we'll hold hands and be really good friends and see where it goes from there. But, it is much more calming to a young woman to be able to talk about these things. Be that for somebody, especially if you're the mom. Be that for them. Help them, guide them. They need that. It's important. But some of those things that I heard, especially early on, and things like, make sure the setting is 100% right before you address anything. Well, my husband and I made a decision together early on in our marriage that there may come a day where waiting is going to be detrimental. And so we will address something in that moment if we need to, in a respectful way, in a kind way, in a loving way. But sometimes you can't wait for, I'm going to make his favorite meal and get all beautiful. And I mean, we don't live in the Leave It to Beaver, Cleaver household world anymore. Sometimes you don't have the time to wait for that. Now, sometimes you do need to wait, and that's where asking God for wisdom comes in. But sometimes there may be a circumstance where you say, we have to talk about this now. I'm concerned. And husbands and wives need to take each other's temperature in that area and just not be afraid. I think sometimes marriages could have been saved that fell apart if they just didn't have that mindset of it's got to be a perfect time and place and structure. So sometimes those kinds of things need to be addressed. But I want to take a look at what the Bible says that Jonathan and David shared together, what Jonathan gave to David and how their relationship was, because those elements can really help to make a marriage be amazing. So number one, Jonathan and David made a covenant. Jonathan didn't go looking for another friend. He appreciated David for who and what he was. He kept David's secrets, and David was enough for him. Do you think about what it would be like to be married to someone else? Do you keep your husband's secrets? Is he enough for you? With the advancement of social media, there was a few years there where it seemed like so many marriages were falling apart because the husband or wife would reconnect with someone that they'd had a previous relationship with, and they would get close again, and that was certainly a terrible thing. And of course, it is still a side effect or a possibility from being on social media or communicating in a private way through texting or email or social media. But when you make a bond with your husband, you make a covenant, you have made promises that need to be kept. My husband always talks about the ring, the wedding ring, and what it means. And it's not just to separate you from every other man on the planet. It's a symbol of being devoted to a person, to one person. And of course, that's your husband. That's the one that you promised it would be, that you would be devoted to. Is he enough for you? Or are you constantly looking for ways to compare him to somebody else's husband? Do you love him for who he is? That covenant that Jonathan made with David was enough for Jonathan. He didn't go looking to see if there was someone better. David was enough.